I'm Janice Ellig, CEO of Ellig Group, Executive Search Advisors, where we are reimagining search. Thank you for joining me today for our webinar series, where we invite thought leaders and subject matter experts to speak on the crisis that we are navigating today and every day, where it seems to be changing. And we don't have all the answers, and we don't have all the solutions, but each of our guests helps provide guidance and ideas for us to consider. I am delighted to welcome Dr. Marilyn Puder-York, a colleague and friend who I met when we both worked at Citibank several years ago. Marilyn is a trusted advocate for both promising and established senior leaders. She is a licensed psychologist and is one of the first coaches to apply cognitive behavioral psychology to the enhancement of executive careers. Dr. Puder-York understands how these business disruptions steal from an executive's day-to-day responsibilities and ultimate long-term success of an organization. Through her one-on-one executive coaching, she helps clients realize excellence by applying her deep clinical training. And she helps her clients really maintain resiliency, adjust behaviors where needed, increase their confidence, enhance communications, and identify those skills which they really need to perform better at. She identifies and helps manage those blind spots also to improve superior performance. I've watched Marilyn in action over many, many years, and she is truly a pro. And she has also published a book, The Office Survival Guide, Surefire Techniques for Dealing with Challenging People and Situations, published by McGraw-Hill. And I'm very proud to say that she is a strategic partner with the Ellig Group. And she also maintains a private practice for resiliency and coaching. So I'm really delighted to welcome Marilyn Puder-York. Thank you, Marilyn, for joining us today.
It's a total pleasure and delight, and I love getting introductions. It's very rare to get that, so I'm glad I'm participating, but thank you for inviting me. I also want to express my appreciation to the listeners for registering for the webinar, and I'm obviously hoping everyone's well. I just have to put this out because in the last 2 days, I mean, we were going to focus on COVID, right, as the primary crisis, and now we have more crises to contend with. So I'm very aware of the emotional and psychological impact that everybody's going through right now with the senseless killing of George Floyd and the protests and the riots that have ensued. It's having a huge impact on all of us. And my goal today, as you had asked me to, is to offer some suggestions for leadership behaviors that can hopefully assuage some of the angst of the active workforce that are, of the respective organizations that leaders are from. And I hope I can bring a little light into some of this because I wanted this to be aspirational and inspiring and maybe encouraging.
Talked about a week ago, now this is June 2, and it's really, the world has changed again, and so it's so sad. It's so disheartening. And, I heard Tom Friedman today, Becky Quick is speaking to him, and he's saying he's never been more worried about the state of our nation, right? I'm going to step back for a moment though, Marilyn, and because you're trained as a clinical psychologist, you've worked with thousands of executives, getting to them to be better leaders. But you yourself, and you put yourself out in terms of your own vulnerabilities, in terms of you yourself have gone through some traumas, as we all have, personally and professionally, right? And let's go back in time in terms of where you went through some trauma with 9/11. And living through that and how that's made you a better coach. Take us back to 9/11, a little bit about what you went through and how that's made you be a better coach today.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm not going to give you an autobiography. We don't have that much time.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe another webinar. But I had a lot more traumas before 9/11. 9/11 was the final trauma, at least for this part of my life. The last few decades. I came into the world with a lot of trauma, and I won't go into it, but let's suffice to say that I've had several traumatic events, including 9/11. And what it has built up in me, and I'm going to be talking about that. Sometimes there is a silver lining, because if we don't have a little hope, we go down the road of despair, and some of us get sick from that, some of us get enraged from that. But I'm going to try to put a message here, is that there can be silver linings, but we need good leaders to help us get there. I learned adaptive skills when I was very young. I wouldn't have developed into the person I become, the professional I become, if it wasn't for the struggles, frankly, to learn how to adapt to very, very difficult situations. It forced me to be hypervigilant. It forced me to be attentive to the threats in my life and figure out how to protect myself and figure out how to adapt to the situations as best as I could, so I could get through it and could potentially rise above it. Now, where I got that, maybe I was born with that stuff, but whatever I did, it wasn't certainly coming from parents, but it was coming from my need to survive. I have to say that it increased my self-awareness. It honed my intuition. It created more emotional intelligence and empathy. It also gave me the basic skills of coaching people, even before I got credentialed. And most importantly, it taught me a lot about the practical street smarts of how one survives. Now, 9/11, since you brought it up, the really strange part of that is my life was saved by a client. I was going to pick up my daughter at the local, we lived in Battery Park City right across, and I was working with him in coaching. And I had to pick up my daughter from elementary, and my husband was busy with something else, and he came with me, and we were half a block away when the building came down, the South Tower, and I just, admittedly, with all my so-called wisdom, froze. And he really helped me figure out what to do. We almost jumped in the water, but basically I froze, and he helped me get out of the situation. We had some major distress along the way, but what it taught me is how you need other people, how you can, and it also taught me after that the importance of community and engagement, which will come up in our discussion. Because when we moved back after 6 weeks, the level of community support and engagement was so spiritually enriching, that it really helped my resiliency through that. And the last thing I was going to say is, frankly, this whole experience of developing my own resiliency has put a focus in my coaching practice. It's really all about resiliency, manifested differently. Sometimes it's building resiliency to manage a difficult marriage. Sometimes it's resiliency in putting a leader being put through this kind of level of multiple stresses on their organization. But the last comment I want to make is, I really do believe that resiliency is the necessity of our time. We can't predict what's going to happen, but the ability to rebound from adversity with the best of making the best of every situation we find ourselves in and helping other people will create growth and maybe even progress.
I've heard you say that being self-aware, that self-awareness is the cornerstone of resiliency.
It is.
So to be self-aware, oftentimes you have to confide in others to understand what is going on. And how do leaders do that? I mean, how do you confide in others to become more self-aware? How can you trust in others to get feedback, to become more self-aware of who you are? That can be a slippery slope sometimes.
Very, very. Good question. Look, right off the bat, I'm just going to say that the best and worst leadership behaviors come out of a situation like this. And we know that, right? But I'm going to say straight out that the most stabilizing leadership that we will witness tends to be exhibited by leaders who have a great deal of self-awareness. And what is that about? I think the question implies that as as executives get more and more senior, they get a little more isolated. They become more powerful. People become more intimidated by them. They don't always it's harder to get unvarnished feedback from people who potentially are intimidated by. So some leaders kind of live in a bubble. They almost believe their own press, so to speak. The most resilient leaders are courageous in really wanting to know themselves. They want to make sure that their intention turns into positive impact. And sometimes leaders' intention does not, because they're using behaviors or styles that are not fitting the situation or the population they're trying to move forward. And frankly, they're seeking to uncover their blind spots. And I think you know the term. I don't know if people in our audience or listeners know the term, but it's basically, and I'll make it kind of quick, it's about habitual, internalized ways of thinking and behaving that were created in an earlier point in someone's life when it was adaptive. But then, you go from an individual contributor expert to a leader, and the same thoughts and behaviors that fit then don't fit now. The trouble is often people go into automatic phase when they're facing a lot of stress, and their behaviors may represent the blind spots, which are no longer adaptive in the situation.
Can you give an example? This is very important, because can you give an example of that blind spot of something that you did before?
Yes. Yeah. And there's one that just came to mind. I was actually going to use it in another section, but I'll use it now. Is one of my clients was telling me that his senior executive just lost the opportunity to show empathy, which could have raised the group. They were on a platform, a video conference, and the senior executive, who hadn't talked to their staff in quite a while, probably under huge amount of stress, got very task focused, came into the Zoom call, whatever it was, came into the call with, tell me what you're doing, where are we on the project, blah, blah, blah. And he hadn't seen his executive committee in, I think a week or so. And that was in the earlier part, and basically went into it, never said a word. There was no intention to think about, wait a second, I'm a leader here. These are my people. Why don't I check in with them and just see how they're doing? You don't have to be a therapist. You don't have to spend a half an hour on asking, but just raise it, raise it instead of just going right to the outcome. And, what the guy told me is, that's not atypical for this guy, because he was a individual contributor early part of his career, an expert who was always delivering outcomes. And now he's more of a senior leader where, you really have to provide a level of empathy, and that's one example, but it's not like he's a bad guy. He just went into automatic. He's worried about the numbers. He's, anxious about things. And without being self-aware that you need to modify those emotions and focus on your team to build them up, he missed an opportunity, and that had an impact on the team. So that's kind of an example. Now, the thing is, resilient leaders do have advisors, strategic advisors in their cabinet. And the most self-aware, resilient leaders lean on them. And generally, it's the head of HR, chief people officer. They go to them for feedback. I have this challenge. I want to know how I'm doing on it. I want to create innovation in the organization. I got to get my team to think out of the box. What am I doing right? Am I getting my team to think out of the box? What am I doing to foster innovation? So they're going to and soliciting. Beautiful. But let's be honest. How many leaders take the initiative to get feedback? All right.
Right.
Some of them are defensive. Some of them are so, forgive the word, so overconfident that they don't think they're doing anything. I was going to use the word narcissistic, but I'll be overconfident for the second. I don't want to get into any political trouble, but the leader doesn't initiate. And in fact, the way they're behaving is creating contagious stress. They come in, they overreact, they're impulsive because they're anxious. They they cause problems for direct reports who then continue to emulate that behavior at a time when we need resiliency. We don't want to make people's mental health worse than they already are, given what's going on externally. So that takes the courage, the political skill, and the diplomacy of the HR person to very nicely, as I have to do when I coach with people who are a little defensive, explain how they have the best of intentions, but it doesn't land well. And this is the way they need to modify their behavior because the situation is different. Not that you're overconfident, a little bit narcissistic, but you have to modify your behavior in the situation. But also, you're going to be encouraging programmatic efforts in your organization if you haven't already. You sponsored a webinar with Sean and Lisa, I think, the HR people in their respective, and they went into all the detail, and if people wanted to review that, but and so they need to sponsor those things that will impact the mental well-being of the workforce. And they also, along with communication experts, really need to make sure that the narratives that go out with all communication efforts are providing clarity and empathy. Two things that can reduce anxiety. So yeah, it's easier when you're dealing with self-aware people. Let's put that out there. But when they're not so self-aware, there is a burden on others to manage that in a way that benefits the organization, frankly.
Yeah, so that was Sean Woodruff of TIA and Lisa Buckingham of Lincoln, and they were talking about they have a voice at the table with their CEOs. And you want that. You want the CEO to be listening and getting that input and be told, maybe you're going down the wrong path. Now you have leaders that are facing leaders of the HR function or leaders of the organization, the CEOs. They're facing two storms, right? COVID-19 during, and we'll go through post, and these protests, right? So listening to the voice of people, and everybody's talking about diversity and inclusion, and we've got to hire more people. We have to put money into communities where we're operating. So you're hearing a lot of CEOs, and I won't name one because if I name one, I'll have to name many of them, but they're doing some great things about trying to put money into the community to hire people or to educate people. And you listen to them in the morning on these shows, and you're seeing that they really want to step up to the plate and make things happen.
Yeah, I'm going to respond to that. It's further down the road in my notes here, but I'll bring it up now. I think there's some things that reflect empathy, and some of them are intentionally showing concern for your people, but some of it is indirect in making sure that the core values of your organization, especially if it aligns with what's going on in the world right now, diversity. If your customers are diverse and your employees are diverse and you have a diversity and inclusion program, you want to say something in an email blast about this. You do not want to ignore what's going on right now. You certainly want to understand and empathize with the protests, but you also want to stand up for, fairness, equality, all that. Obviously the riots are a whole different story, but you want to show an understanding of how that impacts your customers and your employees. That shows, and there's some beautiful emails that are going on. I saw one from my daughter's CEO, won't mention the company, and it was moving. I mean, I felt good that Sarah worked for that guy, Yeah. But there are other things that self-aware leaders can be doing, Janice, if you don't mind my going into some of the—
I would like to hear. What should they—
Can I share it? Yeah. Look, one of the things we got to remember at the outset are leaders are role models. They're like parents to children. I'm not saying employees are children. I'm not saying leaders are parents, but others look up to them and they emulate them. So if a leader has a certain mindset and a certain behavior, his followers will do the same thing. And it cascades downward. And during this particular crisis, if the leader is even more evolved and he expects his people to be more evolved, you may, and this is the silver lining of things sometimes, assuming organizations survive and all, financially, the truth is you can create a better culture from this if there's a real effort to behave in a resilient, self-aware way. Look, self-aware leaders are a little more well-balanced, and they have high-performing teams. Why do they have high-performing teams? Because they don't lead with their ego, okay? They basically know what they're good at, know what they're not good at, and they have people around them to complement, the same as they do with their cabinet of advisors. And they tend not to micromanage and lead through perfectionism. Instead, they try to lead through influence and development and coaching. There's loyalty and faith and trust in leaders who behave that way. Is that an antidote to anxiety? Yes, but there are other ones. The other ones is leaders behave consistently, those that are self-aware. What you see is what you get, and there's a level of predictability, Janice, to them. What does predictability do? It instills confidence, it instills stability. What does stability do? It reduces some anxiety, okay? And you know what to expect. The values are consistently demonstrated. They walk the talk. So you don't have ambiguity making you even more anxious about where is he coming from today versus tomorrow. The other thing that I think is super important, and a message that should go out to all of us, frankly, is that they're a little more evolved, self-aware leaders who are resilient. They make a priority about taking care of themselves and avoiding burnout, because they have to wear the mask before they put the mask on others, in the sense that they need to set boundary on their schedules, to have R&R, to eat well, to sleep well, to exercise, to do whatever stress management they need to do. The other thing about leaders who are self-aware is they know in their environment what triggers them with negative emotion. So if they have a toxic situation or people who are acting in a toxic way that create guilt, anger, frustration, what that leader has a tendency to do if they know themselves well enough is limit the exposure. And if they can't limit the exposure, they self-regulate the emotional reaction.
How do they do that? So they set a boundary, or?
Yeah, what they do is they kind of know what they feel, and they know if they express the feeling. You know, if this whiner is coming to you and just expressing helplessness and hopelessness, and can you help me figure out what to do? And they're a high-paid executive, for whatever reason, they're letting their emotion, you know, interfere with their performance. You could be a little empathetic, but at some point, if they're not thinking through a way to problem solve, you're going to get frustrated with them. Now, you don't want to make that person anxious or feel in any way, forgive the word, abused a little bit by your anger. So what you're going to say, hopefully, is, you know what, I expect that you're going to go out and you're going to figure this out. If you need to talk to anyone, there are these people who can coach you. Not, I don't mean external people, internally. And regulate his frustration so the leader doesn't express reactively his frustration with this person not rising to the occasion and feeling more of a victim, you know, than a problem solver. Because what they don't want to do is create any contagious stress. The other thing that self-aware leaders do is, because their ego is in check, they're confident, but their leaders are in check, they provide visibility. They provide platforms for their people who need to excel. They recognize contributions. Again, loyalty, motivation. So bottom line, self-aware leaders demonstrate calmness because they're well-balanced. They're comfortable in their own skin. They have the confidence, but not the arrogance. And they exhibit a bit of nobility, I think, in their calmness, but without the display of unhealthy narcissism.
But Marilyn, you know, I have seen some leaders that somewhat narcissistic, but they're still great leaders. You know, they still have some transparency there. They do ask for input. And when they get it, they say, okay, now I've got the input, but we're going to go this way. So, I mean, there's a bit of a combination there, you know.
Healthy narcissism, and thank you, because I should not make the word narcissistic sound unhealthy. If you didn't have some narcissism, you probably wouldn't rise to the top, because there is a sense of ambition, and there is a sense of wanting to make the best of your talents, okay, and pride in yourself. I'm talking about the unhealthy side of narcissism, where it's kind of all about you. It's not about your followership. It's not necessarily, maybe it's about your customers, or your clients. Maybe it's about the board, but it's really not necessarily the people below you. They're tools to your success, as opposed to, they are your clients too. You want to raise them up. So yes, I meant negative, more unhealthy narcissism. That's not true leadership. It's self-promotion, perhaps. It doesn't mean they're not talented, but from a leadership sense, in terms of reducing anxiety, I'm not sure the unhealthy narcissists who are functional, it's a characterological issue, frankly, are as talented as the self-aware, highly confident executive who makes it a priority that the client is not just the board, the client is not just the top CEO, the client is not just the customer, it's also staff and the workforce.
You know, one of the things that we're seeing in executive search is a lot of our clients come to us because we do focus on putting more women in underrepresented groups in the C-suite and the boardroom, that our candidates really do want to go to purpose-driven organizations.
Yes.
You know, they want to go to organizations where they can see people that look like them, you know, or where they can rise to higher levels. And that they listen to what that CEO is saying on earnings reports and in their annual report. They want to hear the tone at the top.
Yeah, they do.
It's important, that transparency. So when you're coaching executives, you're listening to how they're communicating, correct? To their.
Yeah, and some of them are, forgive it, but clueless, but they're not damaged, or they're not unhealthy narcissists. They just haven't been focused. They don't realize that that's the important customer, is their staff, particularly now when you want to maintain productivity. You want to have innovative ideas that are coming from the brainstorming of your, and you want to raise the morale, and almost like patriotism, that you respect your leader because of the values that he or she brings, and the whether it's empathy, whether it's telling the truth, whether it's hoping and giving a dose of hopefulness, you know, to the staff, and empathy, as we talked about, and also trying to convert negative anxiety to positive anxiety. And the person I was going to talk about, and I'm watching time, is, you know, Cuomo. Now, I'm not necessarily a partisan or anything, but one of the things that he's done so brilliantly is, I think, in all his communications, from talking about his mother and his daughter, you know, the lovely personal stories, which make him approachable and authentic, which make him believable. And you can model yourself after that degree of compassion. But he tells the truth, but he does it in a way where there's hopefulness. There's something you, the public person, the citizen, can do. So I just have to tell you, I heard him yesterday when there was the rioting and everything going on. And he basically said, look, I understand the rage. But there is a way to go from this despair that goes into rage to, okay, despair, what can we do about it? How can we create reform? Maybe we can come together, collaborate, and find a way of figuring out what the government, what governors, what city council people, what can you do better to make it better?
I've heard you talk about, whether it was him or others, talking about this realistic hopefulness.
Yes.
It's hopefulness with a realistic lens on it, you know, so that you can go forward with some actions about what are we going to do to correct it. But there's a realism to it.
You know, we all have anxiety. I probably have a higher level of anxiety, even though I'm wise and capable and successful. All my trauma probably did impact my neurologicals a little bit, so I probably have to manage my anxiety. One way I manage my anxiety is to be productive, is to figure out ways I can help people and figure out ways I can feel good about myself and use whatever powers I have. And I think where the hopefulness comes in is, what can you do as an individual? Yes, when you're a leader, you have a lot more leverage, but what can you do as an individual to move things along a little bit? Should you be contributing, for example, if you have the financial ability, to some of the issues that are being equal justice. You know, are there ways you can volunteer? I know we have COVID, that's a little more uncertain. Are there ways that you can help your neighbors? You know, can you be more creative? I think I told you, Lauren Ashwell and I, who's another coach, came together in a crisis during the financial crisis, and we decided to take our complementary skills to collaborate, because we wanted to reduce our anxiety by being creative and brainstorming. And that was a way of feeling like maybe I'm not completely out of control here. Maybe I can do something that could benefit. And we came up with this resiliency inventory that, you know, we feel very proud of. But that came from the fact that I was looking and she was looking for a way to feel better.
So what will you do with this? What's this?
Well, what we've done with it is it basically is a self rating on some of the dimensions, and some of the dimensions are realistic optimism, setting boundaries. You know, can I put a word into recruiting a little here in terms of interviews? You can, to some degree, depending upon the interview, ask a question like, you know, have you ever faced adversity? You know, in an open interview, have you faced adversity? Well, what were your coping tactics? You know, what lessons did you learn? How do you carry that into a new job? You know, what lessons did you learn? What lessons have you learned not to do? You're going to hear a certain amount of self-awareness.
So Marilyn, in closing, particularly in these very turbulent and disturbing times for all of us as leaders, what would be, how would you sum it up in terms of actions for us to take as individuals in terms of what we could do going forward to be better in leading our organizations and leading our lives?
Well, we take care of ourselves. We try to be as self-aware as we can. We get feedback from reliable, trustworthy people to make sure that we're fully conscious of any of those automatic behaviors that in fact are not helpful, if you will. Like the guy who came into that meeting and didn't spend 2 minutes on saying, hey guys, I just want to make sure everybody's okay. You know, there's a way you don't have to open the conversation, and you just, you know. So I think getting the feedback, understanding the importance of communication, a lot of communication, which is truthful but hopeful with clarity so people know where they stand. If people feel a little more in control through the communications that are given to them by either their local leaders or mass emails that go out, they have, again, it's stability, reliability, a sense of where they fit, and a focus on, you know, a purpose. You know, why are we here? Why are we doing this? You know, and also future focus in terms of innovation. Maybe even create facilitation groups on a platform where you put people in who different expertise, and considering one of the biggest challenges for that business, bring up something where you can, you know, have a facilitator there and get some potential creative thinking. One of my clients said to me last month, I love this resiliency thing. I kind of brought it to one of my colleagues, and we talked about resiliency in the supply chain. Janice, you should have, I mean, thank God he didn't see my face. It was a phone call. Supply chain, resilience. And then I went, oh, of course. You want to create things that are more effective, right? You want to make things more efficient. You want to make things more productive. That's resiliency. Yeah. You know, rebounding from adversity. And I got very excited because he was collaborating and they were talking. I mean, he's in operations and great guy. And our conversations about resiliency led to his carrying that out, taking that with him, and being more creative with some of his colleagues. So, you know, and I think Cuomo is a good role model. You know, I do think telling the truth, showing empathy, you know, trying to steer, and look, he had a mixed reputation before he started. So I'm not saying the guy is God, but he certainly rose to a level of understanding what was necessary to calm things down. He reminded me very much of Winston Churchill during World War II. You know,
he'd love to hear you say that. Quite a compliment. You know, I just think this is such a time for all of us to rise to the occasion. And And I'm a news junkie, and I was watching James Baldwin, the poet and the writer, on a 1979 speech. But comes to mind what he said. That he said, "Not everything that you face can be changed, but nothing can be changed until you face it."
Right.
And I think we are at a point in all of our lives, and of course in history, that we can really make some changes here. And I'm heartened to see a lot of our CEOs and leaders stepping up and saying we need to fix education and jobs and really for those the inequality, and really reach out. So
this is progress. One of the things about turbulent change that I started with, it can be a catalyst. It can make us better, but it can also create organizational reinvention, at a time when needed. But the only way that's going to happen is with leaders who get the responsibility they have to inspire, but also assuage anxiety through some of the habits and behaviors.
Well,
thank you for giving me this time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for all of your great insights and what you're doing to really help leaders make those changes and be self-aware and be resilient during times of truly crisis and chaos. So Marilyn Puder-York, Dr. Marilyn Puder-York, thank you for being a great colleague, great friend, and a great leader of leaders. So thank you for taking the time with us today.
It was a pleasure.
Be well, be safe, and for everybody there who joined us today, please stay safe.